like that you mentioned you being starting at blockchain industry as early as 2013. I heard you refer yourself to as being the only blockchain lawyer in Europe in 2013 and 2014. How did you even get there? This is leading to all my questions about the regulations and regulatory changes, but I'm just interested. Why did you decide to join this industry? And how did you even find a legal base to work with back in 2013 when there was clearly no legal framework for things like Bitcoin or an ICO?
Yeah, me in the starting in the first few years, at least, it was not really much about applying. It was about applying law to the industry, but it was more in a theoretical way, and based on that theory, so to speak, of how the law would apply to the industry. Then it was about interacting with regulators and governments around policy. In other words, how the law should be shaped in relation to this new asset. And so that's why we founded the UK Digital Currency Association, was to give a voice for the industry in order for that voice to be heard by regulators and tax authorities. And one of the primary areas where we concentrated our effort in the initial phase was around tax.
Speaking of UK's regulatory environment for the crypto industry, can you so far honestly call UK the best place to, let's say, set up a crypto company, comparing to other jurisdictions like Estonia or Malta?
That's a good question. I think choosing your jurisdiction where you establish your cryptocurrency business is a matter of looking at different aspects. First of all, you have to look at, well, what is the regulatory environment for the business activity? And so in the case of an exchange, what is the business activity? It's the trading of cryptocurrency assets. So what is that business activity and how is it categorized? What's the tax environment in relation to that business activity? And what's the overall legal certainty that you're operating in, and how things will change in the future? So, to me, those are the ways of determining where to situate your business. Now, of course, there are other considerations like, how close is it to wherever you live? But those are, to me, the central questions around deciding that. UK, to me, versus, say, Malta or another jurisdiction, it's more that the UK takes a very laissez-faire approach towards regulating the cryptocurrency industry. They don't want to intervene, at least from a financial regulation point of view, to regulate cryptocurrency per se and the activities associated with that. They just don't want to do it. And they've been very consistent in saying that is the case. They just don't want to be involved in any way in that regulation. Now, of course, things will change because of, as I explained, every country in the world is now going to enforce the regulation of cryptocurrency exchanges, but that's only from an AML point of view, not from any governance or conduct point of view. So if you like that environment, if you like the fact that it's a kind of laissez-faire approach, then the UK has been quite consistent for you. But at the same time, it's providing legal certainty, saying we're not regulating that. It's not that it's a grey area. We're just telling you outright we're not regulating that. So if you like that, then that's great. Now, if you want to embrace regulation and you want to deal with a proactive jurisdiction, then the country like Malta, as you mentioned, Liechtenstein, these countries may be more suitable because they're saying we want to proactively regulate the industry and proactively set out, rules that by which cryptocurrency exchanges need to abide by. And they need to adhere to that rule set in order for them to maintain the status within the country. So then if you have a proactive regulator, then you need your choice. is essentially which one of those regulators do you like the most? And that comes to the relationship, how open they are to your business model, and other softer areas towards, in terms of decision making. But from my point of view, it's not like one is better than the other in terms of countries. Every country has its own pros and cons, and it just depends what you need.
I have an interesting question for you. What do you think would be the biggest fintech industry achievement by this moment so far in terms of regulation and compliance since, let's say, 2013?
I mean, I'm not really, to be perfectly honest, I'm not so interested in like regulation and compliance per se. I'm interested in what regulation does to foster an industry and to allow entrepreneurs to conduct their business with certainty. And so for me, I think, sandboxes were very useful, initiated by the UK and then replicated in Singapore, Hong Kong. They're useful for building a relationship of trust surrounding innovation between the regulator and the regulated. I think that's one achievement. The second is, it's incredible how this industry has accelerated beyond comprehension. That you can have, businesses like Binance that can emerge in a few years and have a turnover over $1 billion, essentially compete with JP Morgan as a business in terms of net profitability, and yet to be regulated in a manner where it's kind of like 1/100th of the regulation of JP Morgan. So, let's say 1% of the regulation of JP Morgan, but the same net profitability of it. I mean, that to me is a phenomenal aspect that you've never even seen that ever happen before, really. I don't think in any industry. So there are some, but with that comes risk, of course, because you have businesses such as even businesses that were in Japan that were regulated, but that did not stop customers losing their digital assets. CoinCheck was regulated by the Japanese FSA, but that did not stop it from losing, so many assets of customers. So for me, I think it is, we can't now that this is a small industry that's burgeoning, that everyone is just kind of learning as we go. That's not the case anymore. Like, the regulations are more sophisticated. The businesses are far more successful. They are astoundingly successful. So that, we can't forget that reality, but at the same time, we have to be very nimble and move where the technology is moving, because when I started, everything was about Bitcoin and a payment system. The year afterwards, it was about, a universal computer on a distributed ledger, essentially Ethereum. And then from that, you have an incredible amount of innovation. So you don't know where the industry is actually going to go. And so regulations need to be nimble. They need to be flexible enough to change with the industry as it's morphing and changing. For example, like Malta introduced ICO regulations. By the time they introduced the ICO regulations, the ICO industry had already burst the bubble, and then everything had shifted over to IEOs. And, so you can expend a tremendous amount of time and effort in building regulations but actually what you're doing is looking in the rear view mirror, because the industry's already moved on.
Don't you think that the fact that companies actually have to comply with AML procedures, doesn't this fact contradict the whole idea of decentralization and somewhat digital decentralized anarchy that was introduced back in the days together with Bitcoin and digital cash? Well, trying to overrule the regulators with all the decentralization idea, they still have to keep up with their rules, and vice versa.
Yeah, I mean, to me, everything is down to interpretation. Um, you know, uh, when I started, there were of course a lot more, say, crypto anarchists who were fascinated by Bitcoin because there was no one behind Bitcoin.
There was still a
And
lot out there.
so,
There are still a lot of crypto anarchists right there, and some of them are even, quite famous.
yeah, of course, because everyone has their own interpretation of what technology can do. And that's the point. Technology is neutral. Um, it's the lens that we wear in that interpretation of that technology. The same is true for internet, right? Internet, artificial intelligence, gene editing, whatever the new innovation or technology it is neutral. It just depends on your perception and how you project that perception onto that technology. So for a crypto anarchist, they view it as if you weren't the anti-state. Um, for for technologists, they view this as how they can replace or advance, database processing. So if you wouldn't like the private blockchain thing, is just all about collaboration between industries that could not collaborate before. So essentially replacing the need of a centralized database. For other people, well, for myself, it's personally more about how you can create variation in a financial ecosystem, that you give people the choice between choosing an optimized financial ecosystem that currently exists. So, the likes of Visa, MasterCard that makes payments faster, and then advances in fintech within that field. And then an alternative financial system, which is, we've created cryptocurrencies and blockchains to self-regulate how these digital commodities are traded and how value can be transferred across those borders. This is an alternative financial system. But what I personally am interested in is somewhere in the middle. This is a hybrid of the two, which allows people to benefit from this decentralized framework, but can also accommodate the world as it is today. But it's a spectrum, right? And people on one end of the spectrum, people on the other end of the spectrum, and some people in the middle of the spectrum. But that's the point. The point is that everything depends on who is looking at the technology and who's influencing that technology. So when you had the rift between Bitcoin Core and Bitcoin Cash, what became Bitcoin Cash, they had different philosophies that they were imbuing the technology with. So Roger Ver was saying, well, Bitcoin is all about transactions, it's all about payments, it's all about replacing the US dollar and allowing people to use currencies and free trade and all of this kind of stuff, right? And so for him, technologically, Bitcoin should increase the transaction throughput. Like 2 or 3 transactions in a second was not good enough. And so his philosophical point of view was very different to those in, say, Bitcoin Core, which Bitcoin Core were more like, well, Bitcoin is more like a store of value. It's not so much about transactions, it's just about storing value. And then if you want to transact, then you can splinter off and use a side chain and transact in that side chain, and then come back to the Bitcoin itself to settle transactions. So these different philosophies were applied essentially to the same technology. So there's no unified view. In other words, all you have is variation. And that is the one truth about cryptocurrency, and actually what is so magical about it. Because if you think about it, if you disagree with the way that cryptocurrency is being managed, then you can fork it. So that's the one thing that's true, is voluntary. There's voluntarism within how these communities are organized. And so, yeah, for me, it's all about variation. I don't believe that there is one interpretation of what blockchain can and can't do, what cryptocurrencies can and can't achieve, whether they are stores of value, whether they're currencies, or whether they're just decentralized payment systems.
So all in all, it's not about, I'd say, decentralization, but about convergence and variation, and it's not a road to anarchy, but let's say a road to progress and convergence. That's a very good point, and that's actually a perfect finishing point for our conversation. Thank you so much, Adam. That was very interesting. I wish you good luck with the Block 020 event, which is about to take place real soon. And thank you so much for this conversation. We've learned a lot. And well, I hope to see you soon.
Yeah, thanks a lot, Olga.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye, Adam.